Every morning I wake up at 6 in the morning. That hasn't changed for 50 years. No weekends, no holidays, not even illness can interrupt my routine. Doctors say that at my age such regularity is useful, but I know it's just a matter of habit. When you're 76, some things become a part of you, like wrinkles on your face or spots on your hands. My house in Biloxi is a small one-story cottage I bought back in the 70s when Elizabeth and I were first married. It stands 3 blocks from the coast, but I rarely go to the water. The sound of the waves brings back too many memories. After waking up, I always drink a glass of water and take my pills spread out in a plastic organizer labeled with the days of the week. Then I go to the kitchen and make breakfast, oatmeal with raisins and tea without sugar. Elizabeth always teased me about my monk's diet, as she called it. She loved to make pancakes on Sundays with real maple syrup. The memory of her pancakes brings a bitter smile. 3 years have passed, and I still sometimes wake up and forget for a moment that she's not there. I reach out to the empty half of the bed and bump into the cold sheets. I eat breakfast on the small veranda, weather permitting. It was a clear October morning today, with a light breeze off the bay. I opened the newspaper. Yes, I still prefer the paper version, even though my daughter keeps telling me it's a waste of money. "You can get all the information for free on the internet, Dad," Violet repeats every time she sees the paper on my desk. She may be right, but some habits can't be changed. Plus, I like to cross out solved crossword puzzles with a pencil. It's a small daily accomplishment. Today, my daily routine was disrupted by a knock on the door. Standing on the doorstep was Danny Hayes, my neighbor on my right. Tall, tanned, with a white-hot smile despite his 60-plus years. We're not really close. We exchange nods over the fence, sometimes share tools, but that's about it. "Norman, you're looking chipper, old boy." Danny always speaks as if every sentence ends with an exclamation point. "Good morning," I replied, slightly perplexed by the unexpected visit. "Listen, I just wanted to return your pruning shears. Thanks for helping me out." He handed me the tool I'd lent him 2 weeks ago. I hadn't even noticed its absence. Since Elizabeth had been gone, the garden had slowly fallen into disrepair. She was the one who really cared about the roses. "You're welcome," I said, taking the pruning shears. "Come in for a cup of tea if you like." The suggestion came out casually, out of the inertia of politeness. I didn't expect Danny to agree. "I'd love to," he exclaimed. "I just got back from a trip, and I have a lot to share." So there we were on my veranda with 2 cups of tea and the cookies I'd bought on sale at the supermarket a week ago and carefully stored in an airtight container. "You look rested," I remarked to start the conversation. "I bet you are." Danny took a bite of his cookie with such enthusiasm that crumbs flew onto the table. "Just got back from a cruise in the Caribbean. 2 weeks of paradise, Norman. Have you ever been on a cruise?" I shook my head. Elizabeth and I were always saving money, planning a big trip after retirement. First work got in the way, then taking care of my elderly parents, and then Elizabeth's diagnosis cut all plans short. "You should definitely try it," Danny continued, not noticing my changed mood. "Imagine waking up every morning in a new place, with breakfast brought right to your cabin if you want it. The buffet is open 24 hours a day. I think I've gained 5 pounds in these 2 weeks. He patted his stomach and laughed. "Sounds expensive," I said cautiously. "It's not so terrible if you book in advance. Plus," he lowered his voice, as if sharing a secret, "there are special discounts for seniors. I paid only $1,800 for 2 weeks, all inclusive. Well, except for alcohol and excursions, but that's a detail. $1,800. The amount echoed in my head. To Danny, the former owner of a successful construction company, it might be a small thing. To me, it was the result of 3 months of saving money on everything from electricity to groceries. "And where were you swimming to?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "We started in Miami, then Nassau in the Bahamas, San Juan in Puerto Rico, St. Thomas. Danny sighed dreamily. You should see those beaches, Norman. Sand as white as sugar, water so clear you can see the fish from the pier, and the sunsets. He paused, searching for words. You know, when the sun sets over the Caribbean Sea, it seems like the whole world is colored gold and pink. Margaret and I sat on the deck with glasses of wine and just watched the day turn to night. It's times like this that you realize life is worth living. I involuntarily remembered Elizabeth and I sitting on the beach in Biloxi, watching the sunset. Her hand in mine, gray hair fluttering in the wind. Imagine, Norman, she was saying, someday we'll see the sunset from the deck of a cruise ship. We never did. What about seasickness? I asked, trying to push away a sudden sense of loss. I hear a lot of people get it. You don't feel much bobbing on modern liners, Danny said. They're huge, stable. The only time we've been in a small storm was when the captain announced it over the loudspeaker. He went on and on about the entertainment on board, the shows and concerts, the pools and hot tubs, the new friends he and his wife had made. I listened, and something inside me began to change. A strange, almost forgotten feeling, a desire. Not just a vague dream, but a concrete, acute desire to experience it all for myself. Did your family go with you? I asked when Danny paused to sip his tea. Just Margaret and me. The kids are busy with their own things, work, their own families. And to be honest, he winked, sometimes it's better to have a vacation without them. You know what I mean? I nodded, though I didn't really understand. Violet and I had never gone on vacation together since she'd grown up. First college, then work, then marriage. Our relationship had gradually been reduced to infrequent phone calls and even more infrequent visits, usually on holidays or when she needed something. How's Violet doing? Danny asked as if he'd read my mind. I hadn't seen her in a while. Fine, I answered automatically. Busy with work. Violet works for an insurance company. Something to do with customer claims, although, to be honest, I'd never really understood what she did. Her husband, Reed, works for the same company. They met there 5 years ago and married a year later. Too fast, in my opinion, but who am I to judge? Elizabeth and I were also married after only 6 months of knowing each other and have been together for 49 happy years. Reed. We had a bad relationship with him from the start. He's the kind of man who always talks a little louder than he should, laughs a little longer than is appropriate, and somehow manages to make you feel like an extra in your own home. Elizabeth found him energetic and ambitious. I, on the other hand, saw him as someone who looks at me and figures out how many years I have left to live and whether I'm leaving anything of value to my daughter. You should take them on a cruise too, Danny suggested, snapping me out of my reverie. It's a great way to bond. Nothing like an adventure together to bond. I wanted to say that to bond you had to have a relationship first, but I didn't. Instead, I just nodded and took a sip of my cooled tea. After Danny left, I sat on the veranda for a long time, looking at my neglected garden. Elizabeth's rose bushes needed pruning, weeds poking through the mulch I'd put down in the spring. I should be gardening or at least doing the crossword puzzle in the paper, but instead my thoughts swirled around Danny's story. The cruise, the Caribbean, sunsets over the water, new places every day, all the things Elizabeth and I dreamed of. I got up and went inside the house, straight to the small office where I kept all of my financial records. As a former tax preparer, I was always meticulous about my finances. Every dollar accounted for, every expense recorded in a special book, a practice that caused Violet to be annoyed and ridiculed by Reed. God, Dad, you're living in the 21st century, Violet said the last time she saw my paper records. There are special apps for that. Why change something that works? I replied, not lifting my eyes from the expense book. Opening the safe, a small one built into the wall behind a painting of a lighthouse. Elizabeth always said it was the most obvious place for a safe, but I stubbornly wouldn't change its location. I pulled out a folder of bank statements. Sitting down at the desk, I started calculating pension, savings, small dividends from conservative investments I'd made before I retired, health insurance, utility bills, groceries, medications. The numbers added and subtracted in my head. I'd always been good with numbers, one of the few talents I was truly proud of. An hour later, having written out a sheet of paper with the calculations, I leaned back in my chair. I could do this. If I cut back a little on expenses for the next 3 months, give up the new jacket I planned to buy for winter, and maybe sell the stamp collection I'd been collecting for the last 20 years, I could afford a cruise. Not for 2 weeks, like Danny, but for a week. And not just for me, for Violet and Reed, too. The thought took me by surprise. I hadn't planned on taking them with me. In fact, I hadn't planned a cruise at all before Danny's visit. But now that the idea had taken shape, it seemed right. Maybe Danny was right. Traveling together could help us bond. Maybe, away from the familiar surroundings of work and everyday life, Violet would see me not just as an old, stingy father, but as someone who wanted to make things work while there was still time. I pictured us standing on the deck, watching the sunset over the Caribbean Sea. Violet is smiling, not the polite, strained smile I see at family dinners, but a genuine smile like when I was a child. Reed is beside her, but in my imagination he's different too, less smug, more human. The decision has been made. I'm going to do it. Spend my savings, put pragmatism aside, and do something spontaneous for the first time in years. Elizabeth would approve. She always said I think too much about the future and too little about living in the present. Don't put life on hold, Norman, she often said. There may never be a later. She was right. Her later never came, but maybe mine still could. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of a travel agency I'd seen advertised in the paper. My fingers trembled slightly, but my voice was firm when I said, "Good afternoon. I'd like to inquire about cruises in the Caribbean. For 3 people. It was the beginning of an adventure that would change far more than I could have imagined at that moment." The Seaside Dreams Travel Agency was located in a small shopping center near the coast. I had never been there before. My frugality rarely allowed me to splurge on travel. Elizabeth sometimes reproached me for this, saying that life consisted of more than counting savings. The agency turned out to be a small but cozy room with bright posters of tropical islands on the walls and a model of a cruise ship on the central table. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 50s with short brown hair and a friendly smile. "What can I do for you?" she asked as I hesitantly walked in. I would like to know about cruises," I answered, feeling out of place in this bright place. "In the Caribbean." "Of course. My name is Pam," she extended her hand. "And you are?" "Norman. Norman Quincy." "Nice to meet you, Mr. Quincy. Have a seat." She pointed to the chair in front of her computer. "When are you planning your trip? And how many people?" 3. Me and, my daughter and her husband." I was hesitant to pick dates. Everything was happening too fast. Just yesterday, the thought of a cruise seemed like a distant dream, and today I'm already sitting in a travel agent's office. "Maybe in 2 months?" I suggested. Pam nodded and started typing something on the keyboard. "Okay, let's see. December has some good options. The rainy season is ending. The temperature is perfect." She turned the monitor so I could see. "Here's this 7-day itinerary departing Miami on December 3rd that's very popular. It calls at Nassau, Coco Cay, San Juan, and St. Thomas." As I looked at the image of the huge white ship cutting across the azure waters, I had a hard time imagining myself aboard it, especially with Violet and Reed. "How much would it cost?" I asked, preparing myself for shock. Pam smiled as if she'd been expecting that question. "It's about $5,400 for 3 people. If you get a balcony cabin, and I highly recommend it, the view is worth every penny. But we're running a promotion. If you book today, you get 15% off and a free drink package." I swallowed. $5,400. Even with the 15% discount, that was considerable. More than I'd expected. I mentally counted my savings, trying to decide if I could afford such a luxury. "Does that include everything?" I asked, hoping there weren't any hidden fees. "Almost everything," Pam answered. "Accommodations, meals, most of the entertainment on board. Not included are alcoholic beverages unless you take the special package, tips for the staff, shore excursions, and the flight to Miami." The flight. I completely forgot about that. That's at least another $600 per person round trip. "I need to think about it," I muttered, beginning to question my impulsive decision. Pam seemed to sense my hesitation. "You know, Mr. Quincy, I've been in this business for 23 years, and I can tell you one thing. No one has ever regretted a cruise. The only regret is that they didn't go sooner." Her words echoed Elizabeth's words. "Don't put life on hold, Norman." "All right," I said firmly. "I'm taking this cruise. For 3 people." Pam brightened up and started making reservations. I had to provide the names and dates of birth of all the passengers. I called Violet, explaining that I'd found a good deal and needed her and Reed's information. She sounded surprised but gave the necessary information. "A deposit of $500 per person is required to confirm the reservation," Pam explained. "The rest can be paid 30 days before departure." I pulled out my checkbook. Pam raised her eyebrows in surprise. Apparently it's not common for customers to pay by check these days. "Do you have a credit card?" "That would be easier," she suggested. "I prefer a check," I replied firmly. Credit cards had always seemed dangerous to me. It was too easy to spend money you didn't have. As I wrote a check for $1,500, I felt slightly dizzy. When was the last time I'd spent that much in one fell swoop? Maybe for Elizabeth's funeral. I pushed the thought away and focused on Pam, who was going over the details of the trip. "Here's all the paperwork." She handed me a folder of papers. "Here's the reservation confirmation, the ship information, the approximate schedule. And here," she pulled out 3 glossy booklets, "are your boarding documents. You'll need to print them out 24 hours before departure when you do your online check-in." I took the folder, feeling both excited and anxious at the same time. It was done. I had actually done it. "Thank you, Miss Pam. You've been very helpful. Feel free to contact me anytime, Mr. Quincy. And congratulations on your upcoming trip. I'm sure you and your family will have an unforgettable experience." As I left the agency, I stood in the parking lot for a while, holding the file folder like something precious and fragile. Part of me still couldn't believe what was happening. The other part felt a strange, almost forgotten feeling of anticipation. Now the hardest part was telling Violet and Reed about my surprise in person. Violet and Reed's house was in a new apartment complex on the other side of Biloxi, a modern 2-story building with a perfectly mowed lawn and tropical vegetation. The contrast with my old cottage and neglected garden was stark. I parked my Buick next to Reed's shiny SUV and took a few minutes to gather my wits before ringing the doorbell. Violet opened the door. My daughter always looked impeccable. Brown hair arranged in a neat style, a business suit even on a Saturday, though today she was in a more casual version, slacks and blouse. She had inherited my height and thinness, but her eyes were her mother's, big, expressive. Now there was a look of surprise in them. "Daddy, what are you doing here?" Not "hello" or "nice to see you," just bewilderment, as if I'd broken some unspoken rule by showing up unannounced. "I wanted to talk to you both," I said, trying to sound casual. "There's news." She hesitated for a second, then stepped aside. "Come on in. Reed's watching soccer." I walked into the spotlessly clean house. Everything was modern, minimalist, and impersonal. No family photos, no knickknacks with history. Just designer furniture and abstract paintings on the walls. Reed was semi-reclining on the leather couch in the living room, a bottle of beer in his hand. There was a soccer game on the huge TV on the wall. When he saw me, he didn't stand up, just raised the bottle in greeting. "Hey, Norm, what brings you to our neighborhood?" I never liked it when he called me Norm. My name is Norman, and it's always been Norman. But I swallowed my irritation and sat down in the chair across from the couch. "I have news," I repeated. "I've decided to give us all a present." Violet sat down next to Reed, arms crossed over her chest, a protective posture I knew well. "What kind of gift?" she asked warily. I pulled out the file folder I kept under my arm and handed it to her. A cruise in the Caribbean for a week, in December, for the three of us. There was silence. Violet slowly opened the folder and began to look through the documents, her face expressionless as she studied the information. Reed leaned toward her, peering over her shoulder. "Did you booked the cruise?" Violet finally spoke. Her voice sounded somewhere between disbelief and shock. "Yes, December 3rd out of Miami," I confirmed, starting to get nervous at their reactions. I'd already put down a deposit. "But, why?" she asked. It was a question that caught me off guard. Why? It seemed obvious to me. "I thought it would be good for us to spend some time together," I said. "Away from the daily grind, to see new places. Your mother and I always dreamed of such a trip, but we never realized that dream." The mention of Elizabeth usually softened Violet, but not today. She continued to look at me with an incomprehensible expression. Reed, however, was suddenly interested. He straightened up on the couch and took the booklets from Violet. "Wait a minute, is that Royal Caribbean, on the Voyager of the Seas?" He looked over the documents more carefully. "That's a top-of-the-line liner. Balcony suites?" He whistled. "You didn't skimp, Norm." Something in his tone I didn't like, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. "I figured if I did it right, I did it right," I said with restraint. "And how much did it cost?" Reed asked, ignoring Violet's warning look. "Reed!" she shouted at him. "It's indecent." "Come on, we're family," he countered. "Besides, your father likes to talk about money, don't you, Norm? Always counting every dime." His sneer was subtle, but I could feel it clearly. "It doesn't matter," I replied. "The important thing is that we get to spend time together." Violet still looked stunned. "Dad, we appreciate the gesture, we really do. But December? We have work, plans." "I checked your Facebook," I interrupted, feeling my confidence melt away. "You wrote that you were taking a vacation in early December." She blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting me to follow her social media. "Yeah, but—" "Come on, Vi," Reed suddenly intervened. "It's a great idea. The Caribbean in December is exactly what we need. Besides," he winked at me, "it's all paid for, right?" "The deposit," I clarified. "The rest has to be paid 30 days before we sail." "All the more." Reed clapped his hands together. "We can think about it until November, but personally, I'm in favor." His sudden enthusiasm made me wary. Reed had never shown interest in my suggestions before. He usually found a polite way to decline any time together. Violet shifted her gaze from me to her husband, clearly confused by his reaction. "Yeah, I don't know," she said hesitantly. "I need to check my work schedule." "Oh, come on, honey." Reed put his arm around her shoulders. "I'm sure we can take a vacation, especially since your father is so generous." He said the last sentence with a touch of irony that didn't escape me. "I thought you'd like the idea," I said, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. "But if you don't want to—" "No, no," Reed interrupted quickly. "We want to. Don't we, Vi?" Violet looked uncertain but nodded. "Yes, of course we do. It's very unexpected, Daddy." "But thank you. That's great." Reed clapped his hands. "Then it's settled. We're going to the Caribbean in December." His enthusiasm seemed excessive, even fake. But maybe I'm just too suspicious. Maybe I've misjudged my son-in-law all these years. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" Violet suddenly suggested it. We were going to order Thai food. It was so unusual that I didn't immediately know what to say. Violet rarely took me out to dinner. Thanks, but I've already eaten, I lied. In fact, I'd planned to reheat last night's soup when I got home. Besides, I had something else to do today. Violet didn't insist, which was expected. Reed, however, got up and walked me to the door, another unusual gesture. "Listen, Norm," he said when we were in the hallway, "this is a really cool gift. I didn't expect you to be this big, to be honest." I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or another hidden taunt. "I just thought we could all use a vacation," I said with restraint. "And you'll leave us the paperwork?" he asked, nodding at the folder I still held in my hand. "Sure." I handed him the folder, hesitating a moment. "Here's all the information about the cruise, the cabins, the schedule. You can study it." "Great!" Reed took the folder as enthusiastically as if it were a winning lottery ticket. "Violet and I will check it out and get back to you if we have any questions." On the ride home, I tried to sort out my feelings. The meeting didn't go the way I expected. I thought Violet would be pleased and touched by my gesture. Instead, she looked stunned and unsure. And Reed's sudden enthusiasm, something about him seemed insincere. Maybe I was just used to positive reactions from my family. Maybe Reed really was excited about the opportunity to vacation in the Caribbean, and I was searching in vain for ulterior motives. When I got home, I heated up some soup and sat down to eat dinner alone, as I'd done almost every night for the past 3 years. The television muttered softly in the corner, not because I was interested, but to fill the silence. I tried to imagine the three of us on the ship. Breakfast together, excursions to the islands, evening shows. Would we be able to act like a normal, loving family for at least a week? Or would we just transfer our tension and alienation to the middle of the Caribbean? In the back of my mind, I knew that one trip wouldn't fix years of misunderstanding and distance, but maybe it would be a start, a small step toward rebuilding a relationship that was once warm and close. 4 days later, I was making myself breakfast when the phone rang. It was early morning, and a call at this hour usually meant something urgent. I hurried to answer it, feeling inexplicably anxious. "Hello?" There was no answer, just background noise. Voices, music, something like an announcement on a loudspeaker. "Hello?" I repeated louder. "Who is it? Dad?" Violet's voice came at last, sounding strangely distant. "Can you hear me?" "Yeah, I can hear you. What's wrong?" "Nothing," she answered quickly. She paused as if searching for words. "Reed and I wanted to thank you for the gift." "You're welcome," I answered, still not understanding why she was calling so early and why there was so much noise around her. "I'm glad you—" "The connection's bad," she interrupted. "I just wanted to say thank you, but we're going without you." "What?" I asked, not sure I'd heard her correctly. "It's time to board," she continued hurriedly. "Thanks for the tickets, Dad. Reed and I really appreciate the gift." "What boarding?" My voice was suddenly hoarse. "Violet, what are you talking about?" But the phone was ringing off the hook. She hung up. I was standing in the kitchen, still holding the phone to my ear when the message came through. A picture. Violet and Reed at the airport, smiling, carrying suitcases. The caption, "Thanks, but we're going without you." I stared at the picture, unable to believe my eyes. They had used my money, my tickets, and gone on a cruise without me. My own daughter. The cup slipped out of my hand and shattered on the floor, splattering tea and shards all over the kitchen. But I barely noticed it. I don't remember how long I stood in the kitchen looking at the broken cup. It was as if time had stopped. My mind was reeling with my daughter's words and her message, "Thanks, but we're going without you." My first feeling was bewilderment. This simply couldn't be happening. There had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Violet couldn't do this to me. Yes, we had a complicated relationship, but stealing my money? Take away the tickets I bought for the 3 of us? The bewilderment was quickly replaced by anger, fierce, burning, almost unfamiliar. I was rarely truly angry. Elizabeth had often said my restraint bordered on coldness, but right now I was filled with such rage that my hands shook as I dialed Violet's number. The dial tone, long, monotonous. No one answered. I dialed again. Same result. So I called Reed. It went straight to voicemail. I didn't bother leaving a message. Finally, I sat down at my desk, pushing the shards away with my foot, and opened my laptop, an old but perfectly serviceable Dell I'd bought when I was in the service. I rarely used it, mostly to pay bills and occasionally read the news. But Violet insisted I sign up for Facebook to keep in touch with my family. Bitter irony. Violet's page loaded excruciatingly slowly, or so it seemed to me because I was impatient. Finally, I saw her profile and her latest post, a photo at the Biloxi airport with the caption, "Starting a well-deserved vacation, #cruise, #Caribbean, #luxury vacation." The comments under the photo were full of enthusiastic responses from colleagues and friends. "I envy you with white envy." "Finally, a vacation. You deserve it." "Awesome. Enjoy." No one knew that this well-deserved vacation had been stolen from her own father. I scrolled further down the page and saw another photo already at the Miami airport. Reed had his arm around Violet's shoulders, and in the background I could see palm trees outside the terminal window. The caption read, "Miami welcomes, next stop cruise ship." Unbelievable. They really did it. Used my money, my tickets, and took the trip I'd been dreaming of for years. Without me. I slammed my laptop shut and stood up, not knowing where to put myself. The apartment suddenly seemed too small, the air too stinky. I needed to get out. Ignoring the broken cup, I grabbed my jacket and car keys and walked outside. The October morning was cool but sunny. Usually this kind of weather lifted my spirits, but today I didn't notice the warm sun or the blue sky. I got into the car, not having a clear plan of where to go. I just started the engine and drove. The streets of Biloxi whizzed by as I replayed the conversation with Violet and Reed in my head, trying to figure out where I'd made a mistake. It was obvious now that their sudden enthusiasm for the cruise had been fake. They had been planning to steal my tickets from the beginning, just waiting for the moment I'd leave them the paperwork. But why? Couldn't they just refuse my offer? Why was it necessary to go for outright theft and betrayal? I was so immersed in my thoughts that I didn't immediately realize where I had come. It was as if the car had driven me to the small beach where Elizabeth and I often walked in the evenings. It was our place, not the most famous or beautiful in Biloxi, but quiet and secluded. Getting out of the car, I walked slowly across the sand toward the water. It was cool and the beach was empty. Only a couple of elderly joggers trudged along the water's edge, and a lone figure sat on a bench looking out at the sea. When I got closer, I was surprised to recognize the familiar silhouette. "Walter?" The man on the bench turned around. It was indeed Walter Price, an old friend of mine. We'd met in high school, gone to college together, but then we'd gone our separate ways. I'd joined the IRS and he'd gone into the travel business. Still, we kept in touch over the years, although after Elizabeth died, I didn't see him as much as I did all my friends. "Norman!" Walter was genuinely pleased to see me. "What a surprise. Have a seat." He moved over, making room for me on the bench. I sat down, feeling strangely relieved to see a man who had known me most of my life. "It's been a long time," I said. "Yeah," Walter nodded. "Since Elizabeth's funeral, if I'm not mistaken. It's been 3 years." "Time flies fast," he sighed, looking out to sea. "How are you?" Normally I'd answer that question with a casual, "Fine," but today something broke inside. The words came in a flood. "My daughter stole my money," I said without preamble. "I booked a cruise for the 3 of us, and she and Reed took the tickets and left without me." Walter turned to me, his eyes widening in surprise. "What? Violet? It can't be." "Yes, it could." I grinned bitterly. She called from the airport this morning. Thanks, but we're going without you. That's what she said. I pulled out my phone and showed him the picture message. Walter stared at the screen for a long moment, shaking his head. Unbelievable, he muttered. Just unbelievable. What are you going to do? I don't know, I answered honestly. I called her, but she's not picking up. She's probably already on the boat. What cruise did you book? Royal Caribbean, Voyager of the Seas. Sails out of Miami today. Walter whistled. Good choice. I organized quite a few trips on that liner when I was still at the agency. Walter had retired 5 years ago, having sold his small travel business, but he still maintained industry connections and occasionally consulted former clients. Can you get your money back? He asked. Cancel the reservation? I don't know, I repeated. The deposit is definitely not refundable. And the rest? They had already checked in and boarded. I don't think the company will do anything. We were silent for a moment, staring out at the waves. Strangely, the anger that had filled me half an hour ago began to subside. It was replaced by a dull, aching pain somewhere in my chest. You know, Walter said suddenly, you've always been too soft on Violet. Even when she was a teenager, you let her sit on your neck. Elizabeth used to say the same thing. I sighed because it's true. Remember when she wrecked your car and lied about being cut off by a truck? Or how she stole money from your wallet for prom? You were always forgiving, never held accountable. I didn't like the direction the conversation was taking. I didn't want to hear about my daughter's shortcomings, especially now that I was so angry with her. That's different, I objected. She was a child then. She's 38 now, a grown woman. I thought she'd changed. People rarely change, Walter shook his head, especially if they've always gotten away with bad behavior. He was right, and it hurt. I'd always been too soft on Violet. After Elizabeth died when my daughter was 16, I'd been even more lenient, afraid of losing her too. That was probably my biggest mistake as a father. So, what are you going to do? Walter repeated his question. I don't know, I answered for the third time, feeling helpless and pathetic. Walter looked at me for a long moment, then clapped me firmly on his knee. And I know. You're going to fly to Miami and get on that ship. I stared at him, not sure I'd heard him right. What? You heard him. You're going to fly to Miami and get on the same cruise. But, how? The ship leaves tonight. I won't even make it to the airport in time to buy a ticket. You will, Walter said confidently. I'll help you. I still have connections at the agencies. We'll find you a seat on the next flight to Miami and a cabin on the liner. But the ship will have left by the time I get there. Not if you leave in the next few hours. Plus, Royal Caribbean has a policy. Passengers can join the cruise at the next port of call if they missed boarding at the initial one. You just have to notify the company. I didn't know about that, I marveled. Because you haven't spent 30 years in tourism, Walter grinned. Trust me. He pulled out his cell phone and started dialing without waiting for my consent. Hello, Lisa. It's Walter Price. Yeah, it's been a while. Listen, I have an urgent question. Yeah, it's work-related. I don't leave an old client behind. He winked at me. I need the next flight from Biloxi or Gulfport to Miami. Today. The sooner the better. While Walter talked, I tried to make sense of his offer. Fly to Miami, take the same cruise, face the daughter and son-in-law who stole my money. The idea seemed both terrifying and enticing. Great, Walter exclaimed, ending the conversation. There's a flight at 1:30 from Gulfport. If we hurry, you'll make it. I've already asked Lisa to book you a seat. But I can't just take off, I objected. I have to pack my things, close up the house. You have 2 hours, Walter said, looking at his watch. More than enough. Come on, I'll drive you home and help you pack. Everything was happening too fast. I'd been devastated and broken by my daughter's betrayal this morning, and now I was already planning to get on a plane to catch a cruise ship. I'm not sure that's a good idea, I said slowly. Why would I want to do that? To make a scene? I'm not that kind of person. It's not about making a scene, Walter said seriously. It's about not letting them get away with it. All her life, Violet had gotten everything she wanted without facing the consequences. It's time to change that. And what am I going to say when I see them? I asked, still hesitant. The truth, Walter answered simply. That they disappointed you, that you deserve to be treated better, that you loved your daughter, but you wouldn't let her use you again. It sounded reasonable, but it was outside of my normal behavior. I'd always avoided confrontation, preferring to smooth things over and keep my emotions to myself. Besides, Walter added with a slight smile, you've always dreamed of this cruise. Why not make it happen no matter what? That argument hit the mark. I had indeed dreamed for years of seeing the Caribbean, of feeling the warm breezes, of seeing the very sunsets Danny had talked about. Elizabeth and I have been making plans, saving money. And now that I've finally made up my mind, my own daughter has stolen that opportunity from me. No, she didn't. Not completely. I could still go. I could still see the places Elizabeth and I had dreamed of. Okay, I said firmly. I'll go. Walter glared and patted me on the shoulder. That's the spirit. Let's go. There's not much time. The next 2 hours passed like a blur. Walter drove me home, helped me quickly pack my suitcase. I barely remember what I was putting in it, just mechanically pulling things out of the closet and handing them to Walter, who methodically arranged them. Don't forget your passport, he reminded me. They won't let you on board without it. I pulled my passport out of my desk drawer. It was expired. The last time I'd traveled abroad had been 15 years ago, when Elizabeth and I had gone to Canada. It's not valid, I mumbled, feeling my plans fall apart. Walter took the passport, looked it over quickly, and exhaled in relief. It was okay. A photo ID and a birth certificate would be enough for a cruise to the Caribbean. Do you have a certificate? I nodded and pulled a document from the same drawer. Walter put both documents in a folder and handed it to me. Keep it with you, and don't forget your credit card. I prefer cash, I started, but Walter interrupted. You need a credit card on the ship, for check-in and on-board charges. You can't do without it. Reluctantly, I pulled out a credit card I hardly ever used. It should have enough money on it. I'd always maintained a good credit rating, even if I rarely used it. Finished with our stuff, we quickly went around the house, checking the windows and doors. I turned off the water and turned off all appliances except the refrigerator. It's like you're going away for a month instead of a week, Walter joked, watching my preparations. Habit, I replied. Elizabeth always said I was too careful. She was right, Walter grinned. But today, you're doing something completely uncharacteristic of yourself. I think she'd be proud. The thought warmed me. Indeed, Elizabeth had always encouraged me to be bolder, to take risks, to live life to the fullest. You're too careful, Norman, she used to say. Sometimes you just have to jump into the unknown. Today, I was jumping, for the first time in years. On the way to the Gulfport airport, Walter kept calling his contacts, organizing my trip. By the time we arrived, he had already booked me not only a plane ticket but also a cabin on a cruise ship. You're lucky, he said as we parked. There were a few cabins left on the ship. Not the best, of course, but with a view of the sea. You can join the cruise tomorrow in Nassau, the first stop. How much does all this cost? I asked, starting to worry about the financial side of things. Don't think about that right now, Walter said. Focus on getting to Miami and getting some rest before we fly to Nassau tomorrow. I still have to fly to the Bahamas, I wondered. Of course you do. The ship gets there tomorrow morning. You'll take the first flight out of Miami, so you'll be there in time for the liner. My head was spinning with all this information. I, who was used to planning every step in advance, suddenly found myself in the middle of a spontaneous journey, the details of which were changing on the fly. I'm not sure I can handle all this, I admitted as we walked toward the terminal. You will, Walter said confidently. You're stronger than you think. Waiting for us at the front desk was Lisa, a nice, middle-aged woman, a former co-worker of Walter's. "Mr. Quincy?" She handed me an envelope. "Your ticket to Miami. Boarding in 20 minutes." "Thank you," I mumbled, still stunned by the speed of what was happening. "My colleague Jason will meet you in Miami," Lisa continued. "He'll help you with hotel accommodations and a ticket for tomorrow's flight to Nassau." I really appreciate it," I said sincerely. "I don't know how to thank you." "Just enjoy the trip," she smiled. "And don't let anyone ruin it." Walter walked me to the inspection area. "Well, old boy," he said, extending his hand. "Good luck to you. Call me when you get to Miami." I shook his hand, feeling strangely excited and grateful. "Thank you, Walter, for everything." "Don't thank me," he winked. "Just make them pay." In a good way, of course. I nodded and headed toward the security control, still not fully believing I was actually doing it. Norman Quincy, 76 years old, who'd lived his entire life on a strict schedule, suddenly takes off and flies halfway across the country to catch up with a cruise ship. Elizabeth would definitely be proud. The flight to Miami went without incident, although I was nervous the whole time. The last time I had flown was so long ago that many of the procedures at the airport seemed new and incomprehensible to me. But the staff was patient, and my seatmate, a friendly older lady, helped me figure out the seatbelt and entertainment system. In Miami, I was indeed met by Jason, an energetic young man with a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Quincy? I'm from Lisa." He extended his hand. "Nice to meet you. How was your flight?" "Fine, thanks," I replied, shaking his hand. "Great. We're on a tight schedule. I'll take you to your hotel now and we'll leave for the airport at 5 tomorrow morning. Your flight to Nassau is at 7:30. I nodded, feeling tired after a busy day. The hotel turned out to be an inexpensive but clean place near the airport. Jason helped me check in and made sure I had everything I needed. "Here are your papers," he said, handing me a folder. "Here's your ticket for tomorrow's flight, confirmation of your cabin reservation, and instructions on how to find the ship in the port of Nassau." "Thank you," I said, accepting the folder. "You're all very kind." "You're welcome," Jason smiled. "We love helping people realize their dreams, even if it means overcoming obstacles." When he left, I sat down on the bed and opened the folder. Inside was indeed all the documents I needed, including a map of the port of Nassau with the Voyager of the Sea's anchorage marked. There was also a printout of an email confirming that the cruise company had approved my joining the cruise in Nassau. It was real. I was really doing this. Tomorrow I'll be in the Bahamas, and the day after that I'll be face-to-face with my daughter and son-in-law who don't expect to see me. What will I say to them? How will I react? Would I maintain my dignity or would I lapse into yelling and accusations? I didn't know the answers to these questions, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. Something was different about me today. Maybe Violet's betrayal was the final straw that broke the dam of restraint I'd been hiding behind all my life. Or maybe I'd finally decided to take Elizabeth's advice and stop putting life on hold. Either way, I was ready to take the next step. Tomorrow I would be in the Bahamas and a new chapter of my life would begin. Before going to bed, I checked Violet's Facebook one more time. New post, a photo from the deck of the ship, sunset over the ocean. "First night on a cruise, so romantic, #best vacation ever." Romantic, on me. But now I didn't just feel anger. It was joined by a strange, almost forgotten feeling, anticipation. Tomorrow I would see the same sunset, the same ocean. I'll be on the same boat. And Violet and I will finally have a straight talk. Morning came too fast. Jason's phone call woke me up, reminding me that he'd be waiting for me in the hotel lobby in 30 minutes. I hastily showered, dressed, and went downstairs, where a young man was waiting with coffee and a scone for me. "Good morning, Mr. Quincy," he greeted me cheerfully. "How did you sleep in a strange place?" "Not bad," I lied. In fact, I hadn't slept a wink, replaying in my mind the meeting with my daughter. Great. We should get going so you don't miss your flight. Miami looked unreal at dawn, the orange sun rising over the skyscrapers, painting them golden colors. In another situation, I would have stopped to admire it, but now I was driven by the goal of getting to the ship. At the airport, Jason helped me check in and escorted me to the screening area. "Here's your boarding pass," he said, holding it out to me. "No one will meet you in Nassau, but you have detailed instructions. A cab from the airport to the port costs about $40. The ship arrives at 10 in the morning and stays until 6 in the evening, so you'll have plenty of time to find it and check in." "Thanks for everything," I thanked sincerely. "I don't know what I would have done without your help." "You're welcome," Jason smiled. "Good luck to you. I hope you find what you're looking for." He hesitated, searching for words. I nodded, realizing that he probably knew my story from Walter or Lisa. It was strange to realize that strangers were helping me on this personal mission. The flight to the Bahamas took only 50 minutes. From the porthole, I could see turquoise water and white sand beaches, a picture I had previously thought only available to me in advertising brochures or movies. The Nassau airport was small and noisy. Reggae music was playing everywhere, and locals in brightly colored clothes were offering tourist souvenirs right outside the terminal. The heat and humidity hit me as soon as I stepped outside. October in the Bahamas was much warmer than October in Biloxi. I found a cab and showed the driver, a cheerful man with dreadlocks, the harbor address. "For the cruise ship, sir?" he asked in a strong accent. "Yes, the Voyager of the Seas." "Oh, big ship. Arrived today, lots of tourists. Good for business." He laughed and pulled away. The drive to the port took about 20 minutes, during which the driver talked nonstop about the Bahamas, his family, and how much he loved American tourists. I nodded politely, but my thoughts were far away on the ship that was about to dock. When we pulled up to the harbor, I saw it, a huge white liner towering over the harbor's small buildings like a skyscraper. 15 decks, shiny portholes, the ship's name written in huge letters on the side. It was impressive. "There's your ship, sir," exclaimed the driver. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" "Very," I agreed, paying for the ride. Following the instructions, I found the terminal for passengers joining the cruise. To my surprise, the process wasn't difficult. The cruise company staff checked my documents, took my suitcase, and gave me a cabin key card. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Quincy," she said with a smile. "Your cabin is on deck 8, number 8612. You can go up the gangway and they'll meet you there and help you get your bearings." As I walked up the gangway, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: excitement, fear, determination, and something akin to childlike delight. I was really doing this. I was on a real cruise ship that I had dreamed about with Elizabeth for decades. I was greeted at the entrance by a steward in an all-white uniform. "Welcome to the Voyager of the Seas, sir. May I help you find your cabin?" 8612, I answered, showing the key card. "Excellent. Follow me." We walked through the atrium, a huge open space several decks high with bars, stores, and lounge areas. There were people everywhere, families with children, elderly couples, young people. Everyone looked relaxed and happy. I looked around nervously, fearing to see Violet or Reed, but thankfully they were nowhere to be seen. My cabin turned out to be a small but cozy room with a double bed, a small couch, and, most importantly, a balcony overlooking the sea. When the steward left, I stepped out onto the balcony and breathed deeply of the salty sea air. The harbor of Nassau stretched out below, with white beaches and turquoise water beyond. It was beautiful, but I couldn't afford to enjoy the view for long. I needed a plan. The ship was huge, but there was still the possibility of accidentally bumping into my daughter and son-in-law. Did I want that now? Or was it better to observe them first, gather my thoughts? I decided to proceed cautiously. First, I'd look around, study the ship, maybe even find out where their cabin was. After all, I'd paid for it. On the table in the cabin was the day's program, a schedule of all the activities on the ship. Today, there were various excursions offered in Nassau in the evening, a welcome cocktail from the captain, and a show in the theater. Tomorrow, the ship arrives at the cruise company's private island, Coco Cay. I changed into lighter clothes, a white shirt and light-colored pants that Walter made me take, and went out to explore the ship. I spent the first few hours wandering around the various decks, familiarizing myself with the layout of the restaurants, pools, stores, and entertainment areas. The ship was truly huge, a real floating city with all the amenities. I found the main restaurant where the steward said dinner started at 6 p.m., and several themed restaurants requiring advance reservations. The upper deck had pools, jacuzzis, and sunbathing areas, as well as bars with exotic cocktails. All the while, I looked around carefully for fear of seeing Violet or Reed. At one point, I thought I saw my daughter's silhouette at one of the bars, but as I got closer, I realized my mistake. By lunchtime, I was hungry and decided to grab a bite to eat at the cafeteria buffet on Deck 11. The food selection was impressive, from simple burgers to gourmet seafood. I chose a salad and a piece of fried fish, grabbed a glass of iced tea, and sat at a table by the window overlooking Nassau. At a neighboring table, there was a group of 4 people, 2 older couples about my age. They were animatedly discussing last night on the ship. "And that young couple who sat at the captain's table," said one of the women, "are so charming, especially the wife. Violet, I think." I froze, listening. "Yes, Violet and Reed," one of the men confirmed. "They told me that they own their own investment company in, where's that, Tennessee." "Biloxi," his wife corrected him. I remembered exactly because my brother lives near there. My heart raced. They were talking about my daughter and son-in-law, and they were clearly repeating the lies they had told them. "A very successful couple," the first woman continued. "They said they went on cruises twice a year. It's a regular thing for them." "And generous," added the second man. Reed ordered champagne for the entire table, said they were celebrating some big deal. I could hardly restrain myself from intervening in their conversation. Not only had Violet and Reed stolen my money, but now they were lying about their situation, pretending to be rich and successful businessmen. "They said they were staying in the Bahamas after the cruise," one of the women said. "They booked some luxury hotel for a week. It was too much. They were planning to spend even more of the money they stole from me." I clutched my fork so hard that my knuckles turned white. At that moment, one of the women noticed my gaze and smiled in a friendly way. "First cruise?" she asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "This is our 5th, she said proudly. "I'm Doris, and this is my husband Harold, and our friends are Frank and Betty." "Norman," I introduced myself, trying to sound calm. "Join us, Norman," Doris suggested, pointing to a vacant chair at their table. It's always nice to meet new people on a cruise. I hesitated. On the one hand, I wanted privacy to think about what I had heard. On the other hand, these people could tell me more about what Violet and Reed had said. "Thank you," I said, moving over to join them. The next hour passed in small talk. I learned that Doris and Harold were from Florida and Frank and Betty were from Arizona. They met on a cruise 3 years ago and have been trying to travel together ever since. "Where are you from, Norman?" Betty asked. "From Biloxi," I replied. "Really? Just like that young couple," Doris exclaimed. "Maybe you know them? Violet and Reed. I don't remember the last name." "I'm afraid not," I lied. "Biloxi isn't such a small town." "Sure," Doris nodded. "Just a coincidence." I gently asked them about last night, and they were eager to share how they'd met my daughter and son-in-law at the captain's table. "They are very confident," Betty said diplomatically, "especially the husband, always talking about his successes, how he'd built a business from scratch." "And his yacht," Frank added with a slight skepticism in his voice. Although, I must admit, some of his stories sounded exaggerated. "Frank!" Betty reprimanded him. "You shouldn't judge people we hardly know." "I'm just saying what I felt." Frank shrugged his shoulders. Something about him struck me as insincere. I felt sympathy for Frank. He saw right through Reed. "The wife seemed a little nervous," Doris said. She kept glancing at the phone and flinching when it rang. "Maybe she was expecting an important business call," Harold suggested. "She's a businesswoman. Or maybe she was afraid I'd call," I thought, "that I'd ask where my money was and why it had left without me." After lunch, I thanked my new acquaintances and continued exploring the ship. I now knew more about what Violet and Reed had been doing, and that only made me more outraged. They hadn't just stolen my money. They were enjoying a luxurious life, posing as successful businessmen, and planning to continue vacationing in the Bahamas after the cruise. In the evening, I decided to go to the main restaurant for dinner. I was seated at a table for 8 where 2 middle-aged couples and an older lady traveling alone were already seated. "Good evening," I said hello, taking the empty seat next to her. "Good evening," she replied with a slight accent I couldn't detect. "I'm Esther." "Norman," I introduced myself. Esther looked to be in her 70s, an elegant woman with short gray hair, neatly coiffed and lively brown eyes. She wore a simple but clearly expensive navy blue dress and a pearl necklace. "First cruise?" she asked as the waiter brought the menu. "Yes," I nodded. "And you seem to be an experienced traveler." "You could say that," Esther smiled. "After my husband died 5 years ago, I decided to see the world while I still could. This is my 7th cruise." "Impressive," I said sincerely. "I've been putting off traveling my whole life. Now I regret it." "It's never too late to start," she said softly. "You're here, and that's what matters." We ordered. I chose the tuna steak, Esther the chicken fillet, and continued our conversation. She turned out to be a great conversationalist, able to listen and ask the right questions. I learned that she is a former literature teacher from Boston, a widow with 2 grown sons and 4 grandchildren. "Do you have any children?" she asked when the main course was served. I hesitated. Should I tell her the truth? There was something about Esther that made me want to be frank. "A daughter," I finally answered. "Violet. She's 38. Are you close?" "Not really." I cut off a piece of tuna, avoiding her gaze. "Actually," I paused, not sure if I should continue. "Really?" Esther nudged me gently, and then I burst into tears. Maybe it was the wine I'd drunk or the air of trust Esther was creating, but I told her everything about the cruise I'd planned for the 3 of us, about how Violet and Reed had taken the tickets and left without me, about how I'd spontaneously decided to follow them, and about what I'd learned at lunch today. Esther listened without interrupting, only nodding or frowning occasionally. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, then gently touched my arm. "I'm sorry, Norman. What your daughter did is unforgivable." "I don't even know what to say to her when we meet," I admitted. "I've always avoided confrontation. I've always been accommodating. Maybe that's why she grew up so—" I couldn't find the word. "Selfish?" Esther suggested. "Yes," I nodded. "I was too soft a father after my wife died. I was afraid of losing my daughter, too. In the end, I guess I lost her anyway." "Not necessarily," Esther said thoughtfully. "Sometimes an honest conversation, however painful, can be the beginning of a new relationship, or at least make you feel like you've stood up for yourself." "I'm not sure I can do that," I admitted. "I've never been good at expressing emotions." "What would you want to say to her if you could?" Esther asked. "Just be honest," I wondered. "That she broke my heart," I said slowly. "Not by taking the money, though that hurt too, but by not valuing me as a father. That she sees me only as a source of finance, not as a man with feelings, hopes, dreams." "Those are very strong words, Norman," Esther said softly. "And they're absolutely fair. Your daughter needs to hear them." "But how?" I don't even know where to find them on this huge ship. Tomorrow we stop at Coco Cay, said Esther. It's a small island. If they go ashore, you'll probably meet them there. What am I supposed to do? Just walk up and say what's on my mind? Why not? Esther smiled. Sometimes directness was the best approach, but maybe you should just observe first. See how they behave when they think no one can see them. I nodded. Esther was right. Observation first, then confrontation. But am I ready for the consequences? I'm afraid, I admitted. Afraid she'd just brush me off, or that Reed will make a scene. What are you more afraid of, their reaction, or that you won't tell the truth? That question caught me off guard. I'd never thought about it that way. Probably the second, I said slowly. If I don't tell her how I feel, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Then the answer is obvious, Esther said softly. You must talk to her, Norman, for your own peace of mind, if for nothing else. After dinner, Esther and I went to an evening show in the ship's theater. It was a musical performance with songs from Broadway musicals. Sitting in a soft chair, I almost forgot my troubles, enjoying the beautiful voices and colorful costumes. Do you like theater? Esther asked at intermission. To be honest, I've rarely been to the theater, I admitted. There isn't much cultural life in Biloxi, and I've never been much of a traveler. I understand, she nodded. I didn't really start traveling until I was 65 either. Before that it was work, kids, mortgage. There were always reasons to put dreams on hold. My wife, Elizabeth, always wanted to see the world, I said, thinking back. She especially wanted to go on a cruise. We planned to go after I retired, but, I stammered, she got sick. Cancer. It all happened so fast. I'm sorry, Esther said quietly. My husband died of cancer too. It's amazing how an illness can cut all plans short in an instant. Yes, I nodded. Since then, I've been living a life of, I don't know how to describe it. It's like waiting for something to happen, not moving forward. And now? She asked, looking at me carefully. Are you moving forward now? I wondered. Maybe. At least I'm here on this ship, not sitting at home feeling sorry for myself. That's something, isn't it? It's a lot, Norman, Esther smiled. More than you'd think. After the show, we took a walk around the upper deck. The night was warm, starry. The ship was moving slowly in the open sea, and only the sound of the waves broke the silence. Do you think I shall see them tomorrow? I asked, looking at the dark horizon. I don't know, Esther answered honestly. But you'll be ready if you do. Would I be? I doubted. Yes, she said firmly, because now you have a plan and support. Support? Mine, Esther replied simply. If you want, I can be there when you talk to your daughter. Sometimes the presence of a third party helps keep both parties calm. I was touched by her offer. This woman, whom I had only known for a few hours, was ready to support me in a difficult moment. Thank you, I said sincerely. I'll think about your offer. Don't rush into a decision, Esther said. We'll see how things work out tomorrow. And now I think I'll go and rest. It had been a busy day. We reached her cabin, which was on the same deck as mine, but at the other end of the corridor. Good night, Norman, said Esther, stopping at her door. And remember, whatever happens tomorrow, you've already won just by being here. Good night, Esther, and thanks for everything. Back in my cabin, I went out on the balcony and stared at the stars for a long time, thinking about tomorrow. What would I say to Violet when I saw her? How will she react? Will Reed be aggressive, or will they both just pretend nothing happened? And the most important question is, will I finally be able to say everything I've been holding on to for years of frustration and resentment? Not to punish my daughter, but to free myself. The morning began with an announcement on the loudspeaker, the captain announcing that the ship had arrived at Coco Cay, the cruise company's private island. I stepped out onto the balcony and saw a small island with white sand beaches and palm trees. There were already lounge chairs and umbrellas set up along the shore, bars and water sports equipment rentals ready to go. I had a quick breakfast in my cabin, ordering a continental breakfast through room service, and began to prepare to disembark on the island. Not that I was a big fan of beach vacations, but that's where I had the best chance of meeting Violet and Reed. The night before, Esther and I had agreed to meet at the gangway at 10 in the morning. I arrived 5 minutes early and was pleasantly surprised to find her waiting for me. "Good morning, Norman," Esther said with a friendly smile. She was wearing a light pastel-colored dress and a wide-brimmed straw hat. "How did you sleep?" "Not bad," I answered, though I hadn't slept a wink, replaying in my head the possible scenarios of meeting my daughter. "Are you ready for a beach vacation?" "More than ready," she nodded. "Coco Cay is one of my favorite islands in the Caribbean. There's a beautiful snorkeling cove there, if you're interested." "I'm afraid I'm not up for any fun today," I admitted. "I'll be looking for Violet and Reed." "I understand," Esther nodded gravely. "But don't forget that you're also here to finally realize your dream. Don't let them rob you of that too." Her words made me think. She was right. I was so focused on the upcoming confrontation that I had almost forgotten about the very trip I had dreamed of for decades. We walked down the gangway to a small dock, and from there we transferred to a boat that took us to the island. The day was sunny and hot, with not a cloud in the sky and a light breeze to temper the heat a bit. "I suggest we start by walking around the beach," Esther said as we stepped onto the sand. "If they're here, we'll probably see them." I agreed, and we walked slowly along the shore, looking at the vacationers. The island wasn't that big, but it could easily accommodate several thousand tourists, many lying on lounge chairs, swimming in the clear turquoise water, or queuing up at the bars for cocktails. We were about halfway down the main beach when I spotted them. Violet and Reed were sitting on lounge chairs under a large umbrella in what they called the VIP area, a fenced-in section of the beach with more comfortable chairs and personalized service. Reed was sipping some brightly colored cocktail. Violet was reading a book. I froze, suddenly feeling my heart racing. Esther, noticing my reaction, followed my gaze. "Is that them?" she asked quietly. I nodded, unable to utter a word. "Would you like to come up now?" Esther asked. "Or should we watch first?" "Let's watch," I said. We took the chairs a little farther away, but so that we could see Violet and Reed. I bought us soft drinks and we pretended to just enjoy ourselves. For almost an hour we watched them. Reed periodically went to the bar to get a new round of cocktails. Violet mostly lounged around with a book or looking at her phone. They didn't talk much to each other, and even from the outside we could see some tension between them. At one point, Reed, returning with another cocktail, started talking loudly to a couple sitting nearby. I couldn't hear the words, but I guessed from his gesticulations and smug expression that he was bragging about his supposed successes again. "They don't look very happy," Esther said. "Especially your daughter." She was right. Violet seemed aloof, even dull, despite the luxurious surroundings. When Reed wasn't looking at her, her expression was almost sad. "You know," Esther said thoughtfully, "sometimes people steal happiness from others not because they're happy, but because they're desperate to fill a void inside." Her words gave me a new perspective. Is Violet really unhappy in her marriage to Reed? Is this ostentatious luxury and lies just an attempt to escape the reality of their lives? That didn't excuse what they were doing, though. After about an hour, Reed and Violet packed up their things and headed toward the center of the beach where the restaurant was located. Esther and I followed at a distance. "Are you guys ready to go?" Esther asked when we saw that they had taken a table on the open veranda of the restaurant. I took a deep breath. "Yes, I think now is the right time." "Would you like me to come with you?" I thought about it for a moment. On the one hand, Esther's support would be very helpful. On the other, it was my personal account, my family, my pain. "Thank you, but I have to do this on my own," I finally said. "Maybe you could take a table nearby, just in case." "Sure," Esther nodded understandingly. I'll be around if you need me. I took another deep breath, squared my shoulders, and headed toward the table where Violet and Reed were sitting. They didn't notice me until I got close. "Good afternoon," I said in a calm voice. Violet looked up from the menu and froze as if she'd seen a ghost. Her face paled, her eyes widened. "Daddy?" she finally squeezed out. "What are you... how did you..." Reed, who was sitting with his back to me, turned around. His face showed first surprise, then annoyance, and then he tried to put a fake smile on his face. "Norm! What a surprise!" he exclaimed a little too loudly. "How did you end up here?" "I decided not to give up on my dream," I answered simply, looking directly at my daughter. "Even if you decided to steal it from me." Violet lowered her eyes, her cheeks flushed. Reed, on the other hand, straightened up and struck a defiant pose. "Steal it?" he snorted. "That's a big word, Norm. We were just taking advantage of your generous gift." "Gift?" I raised my eyebrows. "That's an odd definition for theft. I booked a cruise for the three of us. You took the tickets and left without me. Calling things by their proper names, that's theft and betrayal." A few people at neighboring tables began to listen to our conversation. Violet noticed this and squirmed even more. "Daddy, why don't you sit down?" she suggested quietly, nodding to a vacant chair at their table. I sat down, still calm on the outside, even though I was in the midst of a storm of emotions. "I want to know why," I said, looking at my daughter. "Why did you do this to me?" Violet was silent, avoiding my gaze. Reed coughed and took the lead. "Look, Norm, let's not make a scene," he said with fake goodwill. "Yes, we may not have done the right thing, but understand we really needed this vacation. Violet's been working like hell, and so have I. We deserve a little luxury." "On me?" I clarified. "We were going to reimburse you," he added quickly. "Weren't we, sweetheart?" He glanced at Violet, who nodded weakly, still not looking at me. "And when?" I asked. "Before or after the week at the luxury hotel in the Bahamas you were telling the other passengers about?" Violet shuddered and finally looked up at me, her eyes full of embarrassment. "You heard about it?" "I've heard a lot of things," I answered. "About your investment company, about the yacht, about the regular cruises. Interestingly, none of that exists in reality." Reed tensed, his smile turning into a grimace. "Look, old man, it's none of your business what we tell you or who we tell," he said without any pretense of politeness. "We live our lives, and if you don't like the way we do it, that's your problem." "The problem isn't how you live your life," I countered, still calm. "It's that you stole my money and my dream. A dream I've cherished for decades. A dream I should have realized with your mother, Violet." At the mention of Elizabeth, Violet's eyes filled with tears. "Papa, she began, but Reed interrupted her. "You're at it again. Always bringing up her mother to make her feel guilty. Classic manipulation." Several tables were now openly watching our discussion. I noticed among them Doris and Harold, whom I had met yesterday. They were looking at us with obvious disapproval directed toward Reed. "I'm not being manipulative," I said calmly. "I'm telling the truth. Elizabeth and I had always dreamed of going on a cruise. When she was gone, I put that dream on hold, and when I finally decided to realize it and include you, you stole it from me." "Nobody stole anything." Reed raised his voice. "You left us the tickets." "I left them for you to familiarize yourself with the details of the trip," I objected. "Not so you could take them for yourselves." "Dad," Violet said quietly, "we were really going to pay you back. It's just—" She hesitated. "Reed just thought it would be hard for you to travel at your age, and the money was already spent, and it would be a shame if it went to waste." "Don't lie," I cut her off, and Violet flinched at the unusually harsh tone. "If you were really worried about me having a hard time, you would have discussed it with me. You wouldn't have sneakily picked up the tickets or called from the airport or written, 'Thanks, but we're going without you.' with an exclamation point as if it were a reason to be happy. Violet lowered her eyes, a tear rolling down her cheek. "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered. "Stop apologizing," Reed exploded. "You don't owe him anything. He spent his whole life hogging every dime, and now he's playing the victim when we decided to have a little fun." Several people at neighboring tables shook their heads disapprovingly. Someone muttered, "What a brute." "I never hogged every penny," I objected calmly. "I was frugal, yes, but everything I saved was for your education, Violet, for your wedding, to help with the down payment on your house, and never once did I ask for anything in return." "Except eternal guilt and gratitude," Reed blurted out. "Reed, please," Violet pleaded. But he couldn't stop himself. "No, I'll say it. You've made her feel guilty for years for living her own life, for not sitting next to you every weekend, for having her own wants and needs." "That's not true," I said quietly. "I'd never demanded any of that from Violet. I just wanted to be a part of her life. I wanted her to call at least once in a while, not just when she needed money." Those words seemed to strike a nerve with Violet. She flinched as if struck by a blow. "I'm not just calling for money," she said weakly. "You're not?" I raised my eyebrows. "When was the last time you asked me how I was doing? When you were interested in my life? When you asked me out to dinner for no reason at all?" Violet was silent, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Exactly," I said. "You only think of me when you need something. And I've always given money, time, support. But you know what the saddest part is? I understand why you're like this, because I let you use me. I was too soft, too afraid of losing you after your mom died. And as a result, I raised a man who thinks it's okay to steal from his own father. That's enough." Reed pounded his fist on the table, drawing the attention of the entire restaurant. "I'm not going to sit here and listen to you accuse my wife. We're leaving. Come on, Violet." He stood up, grabbed his things, and headed for the exit. Violet hesitated, looking at him and me. "Daddy, she started, but she didn't finish. "Violet," Reed shouted from the doorway. She stood up, wiping away her tears. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, and followed her husband. I remained seated at the table, feeling strangely empty. It was quiet around me, the restaurant patrons who had witnessed the scene delicately pretending that nothing had happened. A minute later, Esther came to my table. "May I?" she asked, pointing to the chair across from me. "Sure," I nodded. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, sitting down. "I'm not sure," I answered honestly. I'd said what I had to say, but it didn't make it any easier. "These conversations rarely bring immediate relief," Esther said thoughtfully, "but in time you'll feel that you've done the right thing. You spoke up. It's important." That evening I found a note slipped under my cabin door. Violet's handwriting, which I would have recognized from 1,000. "Daddy, we need to talk. 1. Meet me at the bar on deck 5 at 9 o'clock tonight. Violet." I showed the note to Esther at dinner. "Will you be going?" she asked after reading it. "I think so," I answered after a pause. "We need to finish this conversation. Finish it properly." At 10:05, I walked into the bar on deck 5. Violet was already there, sitting at a table in the corner with a glass of wine in front of her. She looked tired and depressed. "Hi," I said, sitting down across from her. "Hi, Daddy," she replied quietly. "Thanks for coming." "Where's Reed?" I asked, looking around. "At the casino," she smiled weakly. "Trying to win back the money he lost yesterday." I wasn't surprised. Reed had always been a gambler and not just in games. "What did you want to talk about?" I asked, getting to the point. Violet took a sip of wine as if gathering her strength. "I wanted to apologize," she said finally. "A real apology. No Reed, no excuses. What we did was awful. I know that." I remained silent, giving her a chance to continue. "I don't know what came over me," she continued. "Reed saw the tickets, started talking about how we needed a vacation. I knew it was wrong, but—" she hesitated. But you did it anyway, I finished for her. Yes, she lowered her head. And I have no excuse. We didn't talk for a while. There was quiet music playing in the bar, a few couples dancing on the small stage. You know, I said finally, I've been thinking a lot about you and me, about how we got to this point, and I realized that some of the blame was mine. Violet looked up in surprise. You? But you're okay. I was too soft on you, I interrupted. After Mom died, I was afraid of losing you too, so I let you do everything. Never said no, never set boundaries. And as a result, you grew up believing that you could take whatever you wanted from me without thinking about the consequences. Violet was silent, tears filling her eyes again. I love you, Violet, I continued. You are my daughter, and I will always love you. But I won't try to buy your love or attention anymore. I deserve to be treated better. Daddy, Let me finish, please, I said softly but firmly. I've decided that I'm distancing myself from your and Reed's toxic relationship with me from now on. I will not give you any more money. I won't try to be a part of your life if you don't want me to be. I'm going to start living for myself, pursuing my dreams, making new friends. You're, giving up on me? Violet asked in a shaky voice. No, I shook my head. I'm giving up being an ATM machine and a convenient relative who's only remembered when necessary. If you want a real relationship based on mutual respect and care, I'm always happy to oblige. But the games were over. Violet looked at me for a long time as if she were seeing me for the first time. Maybe it was the first time she'd seen a man with his own dignity and boundaries rather than a soft, compliant father who would do anything for her. I understand, she said at last. I respect your decision. You're right. I've treated you terribly. I'm really sorry. I know. I nodded. We talked for a moment and then we said goodbye. For the first time in years, Violet hugged me, tentatively but sincerely. Thank you, Daddy, she said softly, for always being there for me, and for finally telling me the truth. Take care of yourself, Violet, I said, kissing her lightly on the forehead. The rest of the cruise went surprisingly smoothly. I didn't see Violet and Reed again. Perhaps they were deliberately avoiding places where they might meet me. But that didn't matter anymore. I'd said everything I wanted to say, and now I was free of the weight of reticence and resentment. Instead, I enjoyed the company of Esther and the new friends I had made on the ship. We ate dinner together, attended evening shows, even danced at the deck party. I saw the very sunsets over the Caribbean that I had dreamed of with Elizabeth. Even though she wasn't around, I could feel her presence in the warm breeze, in the sound of the waves, in the vast horizon. On the last night of the cruise, Esther and I stood on the top deck, looking up at the stars. You know, Norman, she said, you've changed a lot these past few days. Have I? I was surprised. Yes. When I first met you, you were hunched over under the weight of your resentment and disappointment. Now you're standing up straight, looking open. You're free. I thought about her words and realized she was right. I did feel different, lighter, freer, more confident. I think this isn't just about talking to Violet, I said slowly. Although that was important, of course. It was about finally letting myself live for myself, to fulfill my dreams even if not in the way I'd planned, to meet new people, I looked at Esther gratefully, who appreciate me for who I am. Exactly, she nodded. You don't have to have family support to be happy. Sometimes you just have to let go of people who don't appreciate you and open yourself up to new opportunities and relationships. You're a very wise woman, Esther, I smiled. Just lived a lot and seen a lot, she shrugged. So have you, Norman. The ship sailed slowly toward Miami, the end of our journey. But for me, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter of life, where I won't wait for approval or attention from those who aren't ready to give it, where I will value myself enough to demand respect, where I will live life to the fullest, here and now, without putting it off for later. Elizabeth would be pleased, and you know what? I was content too. For the first time in a long time, I was truly happy with myself.